Mr. Lober, could you tell me some personal background? Where were you born and what was your early life?
I was born in London, a section called Southwark. And at the age of 3, my father had an attack of asthma, and the doctors advised him to go to a warmer climate. We moved from London to Marseille. I attended kindergarten there. At the age of 5, I entered the public elementary school, where there was an interesting incident. My father, being a very pious Jew from Hasidic stock, didn't want me to go to school on Shabbat, which was the custom in France at that time. He went with me to the director of the school, a very nice Catholic gentleman by the name of Monsieur M. I remember his name because he was very dear to me. And told him of the problem, that he did not want me to attend school on the Sabbath, and explained it to him. My father was a man who wore a kippah, had a beard which he had never cut, and he made such an impression on Monsieur M that he agreed that I should not attend school on Saturday, but I would have to catch up with the work during the week somehow or other, which of course my father agreed. We lived in Marseille from the age of 3 to the age of 10. At the age of 10, although during that period I was receiving some Jewish education privately, but he was not satisfied and felt that my sister and I would grow up with insufficient knowledge of Judaism and perhaps of becoming observant. And he looked for another Jewish community, and we decided, or he decided rather, that we go to Antwerp through Paris. In Antwerp, at that time, was a large religious community, and my father had difficulty getting business arrangements there. So after 2 years, in 1913, my mother, who had all her family, mother, father, and brothers, etc., in New York, asked that we move to the United States. Originally, my father said that he had been there and would not like to live in New York. However, he consented, and he left for the United States, for New York, and we went back to England, where we also had family, to wait until he would find a way of settling us, and he would call us. Of course, it took a little time, and on Thanksgiving Day of 1913, the rest of the family moved to New York, and where we lived in Brooklyn. Of course, it was a miracle that we decided to go there because not long afterwards, World War I broke out, and would have been in Antwerp at the time. Right? Out there. Okay.
Okay.
In Antwerp, I received a more education, more in depth. I attended there a Jewish school called the Yesod HaTorah. Okay. Stop.
Mr. Lober, could you tell me when did you come to Palestine and what brought you here?
I was always I always heard stories from my father about Eretz Yisrael. He came with his first wife in 1887 with an idea of settling in Palestine. His wife took ill, but before that he settled in Rishon LeZion when it first opened, and there he served as a shomer, and also because he had been trained in first aid, they called him Rofeh, and he helped to heal wounds of Bedouins and of Arabs, which were minor, and he was able to help them. After 2 years, he decided that he wants to move to Jerusalem. He lived in the old city and became very friendly with a famous sofer, a Holy Script writer, by the name of, they called him Reb Motel Sofer, a Hasid of the Karlina. So my father prayed in the synagogue of the Karlina and became a very close friend of Reb Motel Sofer and his family. After 2 years in Jerusalem, his wife took ill, and he took her to Vienna for an operation. In parentheses, I must tell you that my father was a lover of animals, and he traveled always with a parrot. Of course, the parrot said Shema Yisrael and sang Jewish songs, but it was my father's pet. This has a great connection with his life and mine. In Vienna, his wife died, and he had no children, so he moved back to London, where he wanted to have a family, and married my mother, who was a widow with 3 little boys, which he adopted as his own. This is the beginning, the background of my father. The rest I told you about London. Since I was a little boy, he spoke to me about Eretz Israel. In fact, in 1910, my father went to Israel, to Palestine, and he was looking around in Jerusalem if he could bring his family there so that we could all settle in Jerusalem. However, he found that life would have been too difficult for young children. So we continued to live in Marseille until, as I told you before, we moved to the United States. And I became active in the Mizrahi movement, where I started the first two clubs of Tzirei Mizrahi in Brooklyn. In fact, I have met here recently people who came up to me and told me, "Do you remember me? I'm one of the boys of the club that you were the counselor of." In fact, one day I was in the synagogue, I was a guest in the Kehilat Yeshurun, and at the end of the service, a man, must have been in his 70s or more, came over to me and said, "Do you remember me?" I said, "What's your name?" He said, "Golub." I said, "I remember a name, Golub, but I don't remember how or where I heard it." So he said, "I'm one of the boys of your club in Brownsville." Well, many of these things occurred. But to come back to how it happened that I came to Jerusalem, I became imbued with the, call it the religious Zionist movement. And at the age of 17 already, I asked my father, "When are we going to Palestine?" So he said, "Wait, one day we'll go." At the age of 18, I asked him again. I said, "I want to go." He told me, "Well, wait another year. Maybe I'll go with you." I waited another year, and on my 19th birthday, I said to him, "I'm going." And toward the end of December 1920, I finally decided to go. The voyage to Jerusalem was very adventurous and very interesting, because there were several Jews who were going to settle in Palestine, who had made money during the war and wanted to settle there in order to, with their family, in order to live in and bring the children up in Palestine. And that's why with this spirit of an idealism, I decided, and I arrived here in December 1920. Okay.
Mr. Lober, could you elaborate on what did you find when you arrived to Palestine? Did you know people? Did you have any contacts? To whom did you come?
When I arrived in Jerusalem, my father had given me the name of Mr. Amdursky, who had the Hotel Amdursky, which was located inside the Jaffa Gate. That's where I went when I arrived. He had a son, a young son, who started to show me around Jerusalem, which was helpful. In fact, I also met a very interesting character by the name of Dr. Dehan, who used to have his Sabbath meal at the Amdursky Hotel, but that's a story in itself. Later on during the week, I went to see my friends in the old city, but of course there was not a place for me to live. And I also had a letter of introduction to Mr. Norman Bentwich, whom I went to see. And I asked him if he could advise me regarding employment. The reason I chose the government is because at that time there weren't many Jews who were public servants in the British government, as they call them. And people said, why go work on the kvish with all the other chalutzim? We have enough of them to work on the roads. Why don't you try and get a job in the government? So with my letter to Norman Bentwich, he took me up to the personnel department of the High Commissioner, which was located, the High Commissioner's office was called the Government House, which is located on Mount Scopus, where the Augusta Victoria Hospital is located. There I was engaged as a clerk, as I was called, and worked in the personnel department for a short while. Of course, my relationship with the head of department was rather difficult because he was a typical captain of the British Army, and he didn't seem to be so fond of an American working for him. However,
What was his name?
his name was Captain Mackenzie.
Thank you.
Of course, in spite of the fact that he was not so happy with me, I kept on for a year and a half. When he was transferred to his regiment in India, and a replacement came by the name of Mr. Solomon, who took over the department and was interested in me from where I was born and my nationality, and he sent me on various missions to try out my ability. He sent me to Haifa to reorganize the office of the railway, and then he sent me to Tiberias, where I was in charge of naturalizing people who were not of Ottoman nationality. Of course, the Arab population were automatically Ottomans, but the Jews, they were from all over the world and had each one different nationality. And as the government wanted to organize a elected assembly, the Jews were not able to vote unless they were citizens. So a law was made of Palestine nationality, and I was in charge of naturalization in the north with headquarters in Tiberias. Later on, I was assigned to take care of the voting in Judea, and I was located in Artuf. At that time, the colony in Artuf which existed was Bulgarian Jews who were settled there by the missionaries. But historically speaking, eventually the missionaries left and the Jews remained. It was also at the time, of course, the Artuf was located in Sora, which is the birthplace of the father of, I believe, of Shimshon HaGibor. And there, of course, I saw the Mizbeach Manoach of his father, and also I saw there an Ekev, a wine place where the wine was pressed and prepared. Then I returned to my post in the government house, where I was a clerk, until I learned, of course, that by that time I was already located, and I'll tell you now how I got settled. I met two gentlemen who were ex-servicemen of the Jewish battalion who took an interest in me and helped me to find a furnished room in Zichron Moshe, which I rented. These two gentlemen, one was called Louis Ehrlich, who is still here alive, and the other one was called Margolis, who is no longer with us. They were very kind and helped me to get settled personally. One thing is very interesting, that when I came to visit Rishon LeZion, they asked me if my father still had the parrot. They also asked me if I was the adopted son. I told them no, because they told me that when he was here, he adopted a young boy who was with him for the 4 years until his bar mitzvah, and I had to tell him that that boy was taken back by his grandmother and did not go abroad with my father.
Mr. Lober, could you tell me how you started to work for Jerusalem Governor Serrano's stores?
I was very friendly with the Jewish secretary of the governor by the name of Kornfeld, who later left to become one of the editors of the Dor Hayom, the leading existing newspaper at the time. And when I heard that he was leaving, although I was young and ambitious, and I had a little what you call chutzpah, I decided that I want to apply for the post vacated by Mr. Kornfeld. I applied. First I tried to get the help of some people in the Zionist organization, a Zionist executive as it was called then. But I decided to go on my own because I didn't like the red tape, and I applied for the position. I was interviewed among others, and I was the youngest. When I came before the governor as an interview, he looked at me quizzically. I imagine what's good talking to a young man like me. And he questioned me whether I thought I could fill the job. And I said, I hope so. I said, I've had some experience and so forth. Oh, he laughed. And little by little, he got to know me. And he said, I like this young man. And he took me on trial. I had an office. I worked with a secretary, because at that time I knew very little Hebrew. So any work I had to do in Hebrew was translated by my secretary. And little by little, I was given also the position of investigating applications for people who want to bring relatives, father, mother, sons, etc., also business sectors, or rather industry, that need the personnel with experience would also come and apply to bring people who could not come or did not receive what was at the time a quota visa through the British consuls. There was a shadow municipality at the time called Vad Ha'ir. The application was made at the Vad Ha'ir, who would recommend it. Then they had to come to my office. I used to receive these people once a week, and of course they had to come in rotation. And I had a young boy by the name of Moshe Goldberg who gave out numbers, and he used to call out Harishon, Hasheni, who used to come in to talk to me and tell me their troubles, and they felt comfortable talking to me, and they would submit their application. Of course, I questioned them to be sure that their application was genuine.
That's what used to be called bakashot.
That was called drishot.
Drishot.
And then, after investigation, I would recommend them to the governor for his signature, and he never refused to sign any of these applications. He had confidence in me, and he knew that I wouldn't ask him to sign unless I felt that it was worthy. I'm using the word worthy particularly. And then through that, we used to bring in quite a number of people who needed. There was a very interesting situation at the time that after the application was approved and the person came to Israel, sometimes there were complications, because they would come, people who just came on the quota visa, a chalutz who got a visa to come was allowed to bring his wife. And of course, some women who had to leave the country because of being Jewish became the wife of one of these young men, so to speak, in order to get permission to come. Later on, when this person, for instance, who came as a wife with chalutz, innocently went to the immigration department and applied to bring her husband. When it came to the immigration department, they said, this woman is married. Is she divorced? How could she ask for her husband? So that the trouble started, which meant she has to get a divorce, otherwise she can't bring her husband. And I remember at the time that it was a problem for the rabbinate. And I don't remember exactly, but I believe that at that time there was a rabbi in Petach Tikva. I'm not sure of this story, but this is what I understand, who was willing to divorce such cases, which then was reapplied through my office for the husband. Sometimes there was a case where a person would apply, and when it reached the immigration department, the man in charge by the name of Hyamson rejected it. So it was sent back as refused. The person who applied came crying to my office that, for instance, in this one particular case, that her husband is Polish and they're chasing the Polish citizens out of Russia. And he doesn't want to go back to Poland. He wants to come here to his wife. And Governor Storrs, when I told him about it, picked up the telephone and called Himes. And he said, Himeson, this is Storrs, Ronald Storrs. He said, I understand that you rejected this particular stuff. After a discussion between Mr. Himeson and Sir Ronald Storrs, Sir Ronald said to Himeson, he says, Himeson, aren't you ashamed of yourself? I, Ronald Storrs, the Goy, has to call you and plead that you give a permit to a Jew? Of course, that almost killed Mr. Himeson. And then it was really a problem, but Ronald Storrs won out. Stop. There were cases where we had to visit what they called at the time Jewish colonies. The system of visiting Jewish colonies before I joined Sir Ronald Storrs was that the Secretary advised the Zionist executive, and the Zionist executive would of course just inform the colonies, naturally for security and whatnot. My system changed. When Sir Ronald had to visit a colony, I would advise the colony personally and would tell them, the governor is coming to see you. You have claims, you have complaints, prepare your claims and prepare also a letter to the governor telling him what these complaints are and ask for assistance. And please receive him very warmly with refreshments, and I will be there and I'll see that you understand him and he'll understand you. The result was not antagonism, because at one time they used to write in the newspapers, Storrs, Boged, Red. And I wanted to create a better atmosphere, and this system did the trick. On various occasions we had similar things. On Sukkot sometimes I would accompany him to the Sukkot of the rabbis of the various districts. He was especially fond of the Sukkah ceremonies in the Bukharan Jews. At the time, the rabbi of the Bukharan Jews was Rabbi Aminov, with whom I was very friendly. And also, when he had to go to speak at some Jewish dinner, he would ask me if there is anything I can suggest. He was going to speak at the Menorah Club, and he asked me if I could find a posuk in the Torah what would be suitable for him to quote when he speaks at the Menorah Club. I told him I'll let him know, and I did some research, and I suggested to him that in his speech he should say the words Lo b'chayil v'lo b'kochi v'lo b'koach lo b'chayil v'lo b'koach ki im b'ruchi, which I thought would be suitable for the menorah. And he asked me to repeat it. I repeated it, again, clearly, lo b'choach, lo b'chayil, lo b'choach, ki'im b'ruchi. He said, let me see if I've got it. Of course, you know, the English don't have any chachas. And he said, lo b'choach, lo b'ayil, lo b'koach, lo b'ruchi. Ruki. I said, all right, very good, Sir Ronald. One evening, I was sitting in a hotel with some guests, and I'm told the governor's on the phone, wants to speak to Mr. Lober. I answer the phone, and he's there on the phone. He says, Lober, I'm just going to the dinner, and I would like you to hear if I have it correctly. And he says, Lober Kor, Lober Rui. Sorry again. Lober Hai, Lober Ayan, Lober Ruki, Kim, excuse me. Lober Oil, Lober Heil, Lober Kerr, Rookie. I said, perfect, Sir Ronald. And with that, he went to the dinner, and of course, it was a big success. Stop.
What kind of a person was Sir Ronald? I want to ask you this question, because it's important. You see, he was attacked in the Jewish community. A lot was said against him. I would like to hear your opinion.
Sir Ronald was an Orientalist, and in Egypt he was the counselor on British affairs at the British Embassy for many years, and he had little contact with Jews. When he came here as military governor, of course I must explain that when the British conquered Jerusalem, they immediately established a military government. And in 1920, before the arrival of the Civil High Commissioner, they converted from military government to civil government, and it was simply a matter of changing from uniforms to the clothes. Each one received his position according to rank and continued in the position in civilian life. And Sir Ronald, being governor of Jerusalem, had great contact with Jews. And he didn't know how to handle them. And of course the Jews felt that he was an enemy rather than a friend. He spoke Arabic and was learning words in Hebrew. He wanted to learn Hebrew, but his Hebrew wasn't very good. And of course he had to speak through interpreter when the Jews came in. And it was speaking through interpreters is not as good as when you speak personally. Therefore, he got to know the Arabs very well, but the Jews he only knew by their complaints and by their articles against him. And he had no real contact. They came to see him. And at one time, the governor called me in and asked me frankly, Lober, why do the Jews hate me? I said, Sir Ronald, you better ask the Jews. Don't ask me. He said, well, how do I do it? My suggestion is that you invite 2 or 3 representative leaders of the Jewish community to a tea in your home, not in your office, and tell them that you want to know why they hate you. And tell them that they should let their hair down and now you'll let yours, and speak frankly from heart to heart. And we did it. If I remember correctly, he invited Mr. One second. One was Mr. Glickson, the editor of the Dor Hayom, of the Haaretz, I'm sorry, the editor of the Haaretz. The second one was Mr. Katz-Nelson of the Labour group, and the third one was the secretary of the Bad Leumi, which had been organized as a shadow government, really, which later on took over here. At the tea, they registered their complaints, the fact that the Arabs was a problem of water, there was a problem of permits, which was really not his fault. It was just a question of bureaucracy. But anyhow, they told everything that they had, which they were dissatisfied about him. And then he told them about his problems of personally being able to know all the problems of the community. And then he said something very interesting. He says, I know now my problem. He said, I studied in Oxford and Cambridge. I had many Jewish friends, but they were English friends, German friends, Jewish, I'm talking about Jews, Jewish, English Jews, German Jews, etc., etc. But this is the first time in my life that I am dealing with Jewish Jews, and I don't know how to do it. That was his answer. After that, the relationship improved. One day, Mr. David Yellen, who was the deputy mayor, left to teach for a year in Dropsy College in Philadelphia, and a replacement was needed. The community submitted 10 names, and the governor called me in, showed me the list of 10 names, and asked me which I would recommend. I said to him, Sir Ronald, personally, I know some of them, I don't know all of them, but I would like you to consider my recommendation. He said, not from this list? I said, no. I said, I would like to recommend a man by the name of Chaim Solomon. He said, I never heard of him. I said, that's why I'm recommending him. I want you to know him. And Avinoam Yellen was working in the same building with me on education, charge of education. And I asked him if he would come with me to talk to Chaim Solomon, who was then not at all mixed up in politics. He is the son of the founder of Petah Tikva, Yoel Moshe Solomon, a learned man, knew Arabic, French, English. Later on he got the OBE from the British government. So there was a reason for this OBE. However, we came to Mr. Solomon, and he absolutely refused to take the position. We talked to him for hours until he got so tired that he said, all right, leave me alone, I accept. Of course, I knew Mr. Solomon very, very well, because he lived next door to me. And owing to an incident which I'll tell later, I became practically a member of his family. And I could not recommend a person that I didn't know as well as I knew this gentleman, who was a father of 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter, of which we'll talk later.
May I ask, what made you recommend Chaim Salomon?
I felt that for a learned man, an Orientalist, and there was so much to do with the Jewish community, I felt that there should be somebody in the municipality who is known and respected by the community, not as a politician, but as a Jew, a gentleman, and a man who is broad-minded and knowledgeable of the world. And I felt this is the type of man that should be in the municipality as a deputy to the mayor, Mr. Nashashibi. Very interesting enough, when Mr. Chaim Salomon came to the first meeting of the council, he was welcomed by the mayor in Arabic. He made a nice speech about Chaim Salomon, whom we knew personally. And after his speech in Arabic, he asked Mr. Salomon to say a few words. Mr. Salomon played innocent. He said, "I did not understand a word you said." The mayor turned to him, he says, "Ya Sheikh, int bitkallam Arabi. You speak Arabic. Kallam Arabic." So he said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And Mr. Salomon insisted that his speech be summarized in Hebrew. Then Mr. Salomon said a nice few words and at the same time complimented the mayor.
In Hebrew?
In Hebrew, of course. And all the stationery were in Arabic. Mr. Salomon introduced that they should be in Arabic and Hebrew. They were Arabic and English. Mr. Salomon said Hebrew is one of the official languages, not that because I'm a Jew. It's an official language, and we must have everything in Hebrew, and the meetings must be Arabic and Hebrew, and all the stationery must be Arabic and Hebrew. And then, of course, we'll be able to work very well together. And just after that, the governor calls me in. He says, "Lober, what did you do to me? I have complaints from the municipality." I said, "What are your complaints?" And he said, "Mr. Nashashibi, he says he's transforming the municipality." I said, "Sir Ronald, he's not transforming the municipality. He only wants to introduce one of the official languages which is absent in the municipality." He said, "Is that all?" I said, "That's all." "Anything wrong with that?" "Of course not, Lober." "Very good." That was the end of the problem.
Mr. Lober, how did the Jews receive this name, which was not on the list of the 10 candidates they submitted?
It was a pleasant surprise to them. they all knew Chaim Solomon, and they accepted him, and he was a big asset to the community in that position. Okay. There were also incidents of people who came in as tourists and remained as permanent residents that the Immigration Department wanted to deport. There was a situation that in 1924 the Gera Rebbe, the Rebbe Migur, came to Jerusalem, and there were about 200 so-called disciples there, many of which came as illegal immigrants, who gave us problems later on to get them to stay. I can report one incident, but there were many such incidents. A man was running and a policeman was running after him. And he ran into my office with the policeman. And I asked, what's going on here? So the policeman explained that he was asked to arrest this man. I said to the policeman, just wait a minute. I told the governor, I said, Sir Ronald, there's a man in my office that they want to deport. I said, who is he and what's he doing here? I said, he came in as a disciple of the Rebbe of Glory. He says, what's that? I said, he's what they call a tzaddik, he said to me. I said, yes, one of those Hasidic rabbis. And apparently he got in touch with Annie Landau, who allowed him to open a little stand selling what they called gazoz at the time, which was some kind of soda water or drinks. And he was making an honest living, and he intends to bring his family here. And apparently he was discovered by some inspection that he came as a tourist visit, and they want to deport him, and he's in my office. So he called up Hyamson, and he says, I wish to detain this man in my office, and I'll give you my recommendation. And that was the end. And the policeman left, and left this Jew in my office until I told him, you can go back and everything will be all right. I had his name, of course, which we gave it to Sir Ronald, and that's one case. There were others like him. But the interesting thing was that when the governor heard of the Rebbe, Gora Rebbe being there, and he heard about these people that he called tzaddik, and he called me into his office and said, Lober, I hear there's a tzaddik in town. I said, yes. And he asked me, Lober, what is the custom in Poland? Does the governor call on the tzaddik, or does the tzaddik call on the governor? I said, it's customary that the governor calls on the tzaddik. Lober, will you please arrange an appointment? Of course, I arranged an appointment, but I'm sorry, I can't tell the story because it's a story in itself, which will take too long, and we'll leave it for another time. However, the appointment was made, and the governor did visit the tzaddik.
I would just want to ask another question. Could you say something about this, the character or the type of Albert Hyamson? What kind of a man was he?
Albert Hyamson was a typical Englishman who was serving His Majesty's government as a typical British officer without any feeling or consideration for the Jews in his office as head of the immigration department. I don't doubt that in private life he was a good Jew and practiced whichever way he felt his religion, but when it came to service for the government, he bent backwards to show that he was not partial. That was the purpose he wanted to prove as a British obedient servant. He had an assistant by the name of Mindel, who was nobody really knew that he was a naturalized British Jew. I think he was born in Minsk, but he practiced the same policy as his superior officer, Albert Hyamson. As you know, during the period that I lived in Jerusalem, from 1920 to 1926, while the Western Wall, the Kotel, was opened to the Jews, their privileges at the wall were very limited. It was they were prohibited from bringing any chairs or any tables, and right opposite the wall was the Moroccan Arabs community who lived there in so-called self-fabricated little houses, and the traffic of donkeys and horses was frequent, especially when the Jews prayed, and sometimes the donkeys left behind on the ground of the Kotel their dirt, and all these problems which the Jews had used to come before the governor from time to time. He was very sympathetic, but he said there's a law of status quo which we cannot change, we're only the mandated government, and he tried as much as possible to help. For reading of the Torah, they opened a certain room which was closed for many years, where there was a table where the Torah was read, and he tried his best to have security there, and but of course he could not do much, and whatever he could personally, when I brought certain complaints to him, he tried to help correct them, but it was very limited. Therefore, except that to receive them in his office when they complained, he never objected to listen. Okay.
What made you terminate your position with the government service?
In view of the fact that my father had deceased, and My brothers were all married. Only my sister was home. My mother wanted me to come back and also to continue my studies, which I left in order to go through idealism to Jerusalem. And after certain pleadings from my mother, and also I felt myself that I'm still a small employee of the government, and I would have to take a long time till I would make a career. In spite of my love for Jerusalem, I decided to go back when I entered Columbia University for studying of law, and I vowed to myself that when I retire, and also during my lifetime, wherever I will be, I will have to return at least once a year to Jerusalem. And fortunately, I later, after leaving my law studies for 1 year and marrying, I had the opportunity at my choice. I wanted to be near Jerusalem, if not in Jerusalem, and I accepted a position to represent a company in Egypt, stationed in Alexandria, and I visited Jerusalem at least 4 or 5 times a year to continue my connection with the Assuran organization, of which I'll tell you about separately. In this connection, I must say that Henrietta Zold was preparing to move to Jerusalem. It had a great deal to do with me in my interim life from the day I returned to New York until 1929. This is 26 to 29. A great influence in my life and my continued relationship with her in Jerusalem. This belongs, I'm still in
Jerusalem.
Very interesting. It's also comical.
Gives life.
In 1925, the British government decided that they want to organize, I'm not sure it's 24, 25, to organize an army of Arabs and Jews. And a certain General Costello was sent for that mission to Palestine. The governor asked me to represent him on a tour of Judea by General Costello to survey the territory, and with him he had also an Arabic representative, an Arab, and of course he had his aide-de-camp, and we all left in a car to Bab-el-Wad. At Bab-el-Wad, there was about 6 Indian horsemen with their horses, and 3 and 4 unmounted horses for the general, for his aide-de-camp, for the Arab representative, and for me. I had ridden horses for fun, but never such official capacity, so I shuddered a little bit when I got onto that horse. Anyhow, we all rode down to the place I knew very well, Artuf, where there was that Jewish colony, prosperous. During that period, each Jewish colony had an armory, a sealed armory, which they were only permitted to unseal if they are attacked. Of course, you know our Jewish people, if they needed it before, they found a way of using it. However, the General Costello was innocent about that. We arrived at this colony. We were received very well by the community there. And of course, General Costello started to ask questions. And he said to me, Lober, would you ask these people, what do they do with their arms? I turned pale, they turned pale. I didn't understand. I said, what did you say, sir? He said, I'm interested to know how they live here and what do they do with their arms? Suddenly it occurred to me, he meant the almonds, and that's the way the British pronounced it. So I said, Ma'atem osim mashkedim. We send them to the market. That was saved the situation. Then we get back onto our horses, and we start riding, and we stopped at a certain valley for having our sandwiches, and it started to rain. We got back onto our horses. It was a Friday, and I was anxious to arrive before sunset, and it started to pour, and my horse started to run. I never had occasion to be on a horse on such occasions, so I stuck my feet into which I am slightly bow-legged, and my feet in the stomach of the horse, and of course he ran faster. And of course the British captain laughed, and the General Costello got very angry, and he said, run after him and show him what to do. And of course I learned how to stop a horse when it's raining. We arrived in Jerusalem. It was close to dark, and I was afraid. We were near Machne Yehuda, advancing slowly, and it was growing darker. And I said to General Costello, I'm sorry, I must walk home from this point because the Sabbath is almost upon us. And he said, I'll walk with you, he said. And he walked me up to my home in Zichron Moshe. Of course, it was difficult the next morning for me to get up and go to the synagogue. There are a few things I would like to tell you about my occupation from 1929, when I took on a position as representative of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer in the Near East, with headquarters in Alexandria. But one of the things which is very interesting about illegal immigration to Palestine is the story. I was very active in the community there, and people knew me. And on the Sabbath, I went to my office. And after synagogue, when I was home and we were about to sit at the table for lunch, there's a knock at the door. I opened the door. We lived in town, and there is a young lady weeping and asked if I am Mr. Lober. I said yes, and I invited her to come in. And this is the story which she told us. She was leaving, she left Yugoslavia with a passport to leave and never to return. She was on the way to Palestine to marry a young man to whom she was engaged, who lived in Haifa. She was on board ship, which was to take her to Beirut, where she would leave the ship and would be directed by someone who would receive her to bring her through what is now called Rosh Hanikra. No, is it Rosh Hanikra?
Yes.
Where they north. What is it called before?
Ras Nakura.
Ras Nakura, yes. Ras Nakura. And when the ship arrived in Beirut, they wouldn't allow her to get off the ship. At that time, they stopped allowing Jews to go off. So she was returning, and the boat stopped in Alexandria, but she could not get off. She had to stay on, and she was going back to a country which she could not enter anymore. And a man came over to her, saw her sitting in a corner crying, and after a question or two, he learned that she was Jewish, and he said, I'm going to help you get off the ship, but follow my directions carefully. I will give you an apple. You keep this apple until they call out, visitors leave the boat. Visitors have to leave the ship. You go down the ladder eating this apple so that you should not look nervous. And he gave her the name of a person to see, the address, and gave her a few piastres to take a taxi, and that paper directed her to my home. And she doesn't know what to do. I told her, don't worry, it's all in Yiddish, of course. You'll have lunch with us, and you'll rest till the evening, and I'll take care of you. I had a friend who was a big lawyer by the name of Campos, of Italian nationality, but several generations born in Egypt. He was the lawyer who won the case for the stockholders who held investments to be paid in gold of the Suez Canal. And he was the one who won that case. So he was really a big lawyer. And he always cooperated with me.
Was he a Jew?
A Jew, of course. Not much Jewish, but a Jew. And also, through my friendship, he did many things also to help the community. Like we established the first Jewish library connected with a synagogue in Jerusalem. But to come back to campus, he came for her and put her in a pension, which we called at the time there, a boarding house, which he trusted. And from time to time, he had to move her in case of police inspection. Until this went on for several weeks, until finally he made arrangements as follows. He brought her to Port Said. In Port Said, they used to load the cargo for Palestine and seal it, the department with merchandise, and the seal would be broken when it reached Palestine, somewhere near Rehovot. He made arrangements to put her in this cargo wagon of the railway, and off she went to Palestine. After 2 months, I received a letter from her, from Haifa, that she landed near Rehovot, which I didn't know that was the spot at the time, and she met her Khatan, and they were happily married in Haifa. I better stop and let's go home.